churches are now framing the environment as an imperative, and it just resets the context differently. And so it's very interesting to observe the different qualities of how you frame. The last thing I'm going to talk about is happiness. Happiness sounds silly, but there's a growing field, the word is, I think, trivialized, but there's a growing field of what are called happiness economics. And the question really is, I mean, what's this all really about? It's about having, I mean, why are we doing all the stuff we're doing? It's to be happier, it's to have a better quality of life, to have a more satisfied quality of life. And the first thing we learned from happiness economics is, the more money you have, the happier you're not, that it really doesn't make a difference. We learned that from this kind of, it's not time discounting, but basically give somebody a raise, they're happy for about 3 or 4 days, and then all of a sudden they reset to this new norm, and all of a sudden they don't. It's a very interesting study where you take all these people, take people earning $30,000 a year and say, how much money do you need to be happy? And they say 40, and take people earning 40 and they say 50. Take people earning 100 and they say, if I just had 120. Take people earning 200 and they say, if I just had 250, and on and on. And everybody wants just this little bit more. And, but it turns out it doesn't necessarily make them happier. So what we've been beginning to learn is, so what does make people happier? And it turns out it's not about material at all. It goes back to, and we're going to see more of the neurology of this tomorrow, it goes back to many of these, the altruism. It actually turns out that compassion, that generosity, that being part of a community, having warm, non-threatened social relations, are the things that actually make us happier. And we can measure that now with MRI scans. We can measure it by looking at the different I forgot what they're called, the chemicals in our endorphins and stuff in our bodies. And we really believe that ultimately, that if we can align our economics and our goals, such as in this case, greener behavior, with the ways that really make people actually happier, that's going to be the most successful thing. Because isn't that the goal? To actually make people happier. So one of the huge problems that happened with Jimmy Carter in the late 70s was that he framed environmental issues as suffering. And we've really embedded that as a culture. You know, he put on the sweater and he said, we're going to turn on our thermostats and we're going to suffer our way through this. And that was really the wrong framing. And ever since then, it's been the economy versus the environment. That's a completely contrived, there's not a bit of economic theory as to why it should be the economy versus the environment. It's just, but we have this new mental model that's been, that we have adopted, a heuristic, a shortcut that has grown culturally to see things through that model. So what we really need to do is to find the pathways in which better environmental behavior lead to more happiness. Because those are the ones, actually, if you want to talk about how we're going to get the most adaptation, those are the pathways to success. So that's my brief overview. Are there any questions or points or statements or thoughts? Or yeah,
In
Jason.
the study of neuro and behavioral economics, has it come up about like biophysical or ecological economics? Are those two theories different? Are they merged?
So we think that we think they should all come together. I mean, really, I believe in the ultimate theory of everything. I believe in the unified field theory in which all adds up to one. So anything that's valid should tie together. So what we're really seeing in ecological economics, what we're seeing in all these is a sense of systems theory. So let's back up for a second. So in, I forgot the year now, but approximately 1712, I don't know, 1640, 82, something like that. Sir Isaac Newton begins with the laws of calculus, and he gives rise to the laws of thermodynamics. And what he really figures out is how to maximize the performance of the object. I don't remember from your high school, but in the early calculus, you'd look at like a trajectory of a cannonball that go up and down. He could figure that out perfectly. But the ability to do that, he had to isolate everything. And at the same time, we saw this huge amount of isolation. So you got Descartes separating myself from my body. It's you got all the, and the whole Industrial Revolution was really based on this idea of maximizing the object. And that's where that economic theory of maximizing the transaction, maximizing the self, they all came out of this separatist worldview about maximization of individual stuff. What's happening in every scientific field, economic field, psychological field, is the theory that in fact it is the synergy between things. It's the whole system's understanding that nothing is ever isolated. By the way, the idea that a factory stands alone, in classical economics there's a thing called the firm, which is independent, and its pollution is just called an externality, it just goes in the air and it doesn't matter, is part of this theory, rather than seeing that the air is a system. All of our every field is now moving into the systems thought rather than the maximizing individual thought. And as they do, they're growing more and more common the boundaries are falling apart. And each one is mutually self-reinforcing, which is why I referred to evolution and sociology and behavior and so many things in what was a talk about economics. Bart.
My last comment, which was a follow-on to that, is that Bhutan has a gross national happiness index, very poor, and measured as being extraordinarily happy because they're measuring themselves in very different terms and economic terms, which is sort of a fascinating, holistic look at what we're really trying to get at. It's the only country, of course, that has such a...
Right, there are cities that are developing these, and this idea of a happiness index, and we are getting, you know, Sean, HUD is actually trying to move towards whole community health indicators as a way of measuring where we're going.